Well, let's continue here tonight. The ANC National Working Committee has ordered the immediate suspension of its Secretary-General, Ace Magashule, and other members facing criminal charges. The decision follows a meeting by the body yesterday in which lists were collated from different provinces and prepared for this coming weekend's National Executive Committee meeting. Well, to weigh in on some of these developments, we're joined by political analysts, Professor Lisiva Defo, Sanusha Naidu, and Dr. Sipho Sepe. Good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for your time. I suppose I'll just ask about your general reflections, not just of the statement that was released by the NWC today on its meeting, but just where we are in terms of these matters of step aside and the state of the ANC. Professor Lisiva Defo, I know it's a lot to kind of try and put into one question, but you can go for it first.
I would have preferred my colleagues to take the first bite. But, yeah, but anyway, let's see. Look, yes, what has been said and what do we expect out of that? Are they saying the suspension letters must be issued? If that's my understanding of the grammar, that is, they aren't yet issued, they are still to be issued. Perhaps we are premature in some of the things we are going to say. I would love to see that those letters being released and getting some reaction from the recipients and then building up on that. But I must state, given where the ANC is right now, I have no doubt that what they are trying to do is the right thing. Whatever the consequences, damn them and then try to contend with them for the sake of the organization and indeed for the sake of the society we are trying to build.
Sanusha?
Yeah, good evening, Kathy. Good evening to my fellow colleagues. Thanks, Prof, for setting the scene for me to come after. I think you picked up on a few very important points. I think one of the things that definitely needs to be acknowledged is that for the first time there's a decisiveness in the NEC. There's a set of cohesiveness and a sense of coherence with regard to the statement and of course with regard to the action. Now obviously all of the details that come after this is going to be critical in terms of the letters that are going to be issued, in terms of what the action going forward is going to be. Will it be immediate suspension? They'll have to work out the terms of reference of that suspension. Will it be suspension with no pay? Will it be suspension with pay? There's all these nitty-gritty issues that need to be, which fall in the murky side of things, but definitely need to be unpacked in terms of going forward in the next couple of days and in the run-up to the meeting over the weekend of the NEC. But I do think that there are still those areas where we have to be very vigilant. I think we have to basically acknowledge that this is a step that I think me personally did not anticipate. The NWC, the NEC, all on the same page. That you have individuals which now have to understand that anything higher than the NEC is not there. Where are they going to appeal this? How are they going to go forward? Is there another body that they're going to try and contest this decision? I think it really opens up these dynamics around the spaces. It's also important to understand what does this mean when you read the statement, and of course more generally any charge or serious charge. Now, we know the corruption issue has been the contested issue around those that are facing corruption charges or have cases pending against them. But then, of course, you got this other element of any serious charge or any charge. Now, that becomes an even more murky issue in terms of how this goes forward.
Dr. Sepe?
Well, I think the first thing that we must accept is that the idea of dealing with corruption is something that all of us must support because of its impact on service delivery, on our democracy, and a whole range of areas. But we must also be aware, this is the issue of vigilance that Sanusha is talking about, that where you have contestation and disputes, we rely on certain instruments that we have agreed to respect. And one of those is the constitution of this country and the constitution of the ANC. So those constitutions exist so that they resolve and they regulate how we conduct our affairs. When somebody is guilty, there is a requirement that you deal with it in a manner that is just and fair. And when you do that, there must be an element of consistency in how you conduct your affairs. Because if you do not do that, people will simply go to court. Now, where we are now, as Professor Defo says, there's an intention to send letters. But within the ANC, there are also processes. There's a recourse where people feel that maybe the process was not fair. And the constitution of the ANC makes a provision for appeal against a sanction. It could be a sanction of suspension. It could be a sanction of expulsion. But what is anticipated is that normally you have a process first, then a sanction. But what we have here, the resolution does not do that. It simply says when you are accused or reportedly involved in corruption, you must submit yourself to the Intelligence Commission, and if they are not convinced of your explanation, then you must be suspended summarily. So this is where you're going to see a lot of activity that involves appeals, which is a recourse that is made possible by the very same constitution of the ANC. But here's a challenge. The challenge is that these actions arise out of state action, where the state charges. And once the state charges, the ANC's argument or logic is that by mere fact that you've been charged, you would have to step aside. This is where people might actually say, why don't you wait for the logical conclusion of that legal process? Because what you might be doing or be accused is that they are using a legal process to resolve political issues. And in this case, it may be that some people may simply say, you are jumping the gun. And also, the very same step-aside resolution, when people read it, they read fragmentally. They don't read it in totality, because the very same resolution says whatever is done must be seen to be consistent with the ANC's constitution, but with also the constitution of the country. This is where the politics becomes very interesting, and we'll see how it unfolds.
And you're talking about the politics. We've already seen part of how it might unfold if we are to take some of the responses as any indication, threats of legal action, some of those officials who are affected by this resolution effectively saying that while they're not going to step aside. Professor Defo, given the fact that the Secretary General of the ANC is affected by this, one would think that the administrative processes of following up on this and implementing it would come out of that office. How do you foresee all of this unfolding?
Well, look, in terms of protocol, there should be no confusion there. There is a secretary and a deputy. And the deputy has already declared to some and Sunday that should it be necessary, I will be ready, willing to sign the letter to suspend my boss. I think I'm quoting her almost verbatim, right? So there's no contestation there. But I think what Prof. Siepa is saying, and is what some of us have been saying, is that the idea is good, but how it is being processed is very likely to fall or to fail the master. Because I'm seeing it here that it's almost pronouncing the verdict prior to going through due process, be it of the ANC or that of the land. Yes, the nature of the contracts that they have, be it in Parliament or with the ANC, are unique in and by themselves. But certainly, natural justice would say certain processes, one or another, are being compromised. And it is at that point that some of them might have been saying, perhaps we need more time. They keep talking about tightening these rules, cleaning these rules. Even today, they are still saying, Mr. Treasurer General, try to clean this, try to tighten this, conceding that, yes, there is perhaps strong public opinion that they should act. But succumbing to public pressure only to end up with egg on your face, I don't think is an ideal thing. I would rather let them take some time, clean this, and then do it the right way.
Sanusha, when you look at the gaps that have been highlighted by, the other panelists in terms of what could lie ahead, do you foresee then this issue of the step aside falling flat on its face? And of course, one would think about what would the implications of that be, not just for the ANC, but for the ANC president, Cyril Ramaphosa, because this is something that he is closely associated with his administration, at least, corruption-free administration.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important that we contextualize this, as my fellow panelists have been indicating, that it is, if you look at the statement, it's a portion, a paragraph out of a rule, out of a bigger set of resolutions, and it needs to be read in context of what's happening. I think the challenge here is the detail, and the detail around how the process will evolve going forward, particularly in terms of reporting monthly about your case, and then every 6 months. Now, every 6 months, as I understood the spokesperson of the ANC this afternoon explaining that, means that when the state has charges against you, it's a protracted case. It doesn't go to appear in the court docket immediately. So I think in the case of Ace Magashule, only in August will he appear in court. Now that means every 6 months you've got to evaluate your office bearers, people that are members of your organization at the branch, at the structures of the branches, at the provincial level, in parliament, and so forth. I think this is where the challenge really lies in the process going forward. What does this mean? If you are going to evaluate, review every 6 months, what happens in 6 months if the case still hasn't been brought before court? What if it gets postponed continuously because evidence needs to be collated? I mean, we've seen this in the context of our judicial system. The second issue here for me is it then becomes a protracted issue that continuously sits in a loop of process. And I think that's what both Prof. Tefu and Prof. Seape is trying to say, is that the state process and the state charge, process and charges against an individual versus what the constitution of the ANC is saying. And I remember very distinctly and clearly at the end of his remarks at the State Capture Commission, President Ramaphosa kind of intimated in his closing remarks that knocking on the door of the ANC and trying to unpack the processes in the ANC is not necessarily the mandate of the Zondo Commission. And I think he mentioned it in his closing statement that this is internal. A lot of his responses was, yes, we dropped the ball. Yes, we did this. Yes, we acknowledged it. Yes, we basically didn't go out and immediately deal with the crisis. But then he always came back to, this is an internal organization with internal processes. Now, here's where the real challenge lies, where the rubber hits the road here for me, because that's where the challenge is going to lie in terms of what happens. So you can issue the letters, whether it's suspension immediately or whatever, but you are now talking about members who may right now not have the traction on the grassroots or the kind of traction we think that they're going to mobilize and where they're going to go and other spaces closing in on them in the party. But then every 6 months and every kind of giving them those long kind of levers to say, come back every 6 months, I think you may end up in a more frustrated process than a decisive process.
Dr. Seape, given the contestation that this issue is facing and just some of the other gaps that have been highlighted by our guests, what then do you think will be the implication of this ending up in the courts, especially for people who've received suspension letters? I mean, are we likely to see a situation where people have to be physically kept out of Luthuli House as a way of enforcing what maybe some simply don't want to adhere to, even if they do eventually receive those letters?
Well, this is why it's very important that you don't use the legal process to sort out political problems. And one must also understand that the legal process itself is not perfect science. You do have people who are guilty only to be found to be innocent. And you find people who are innocent only to be found guilty. and then the appeal process continues. So the issue here is that you will get a sense where people are going to say the NPA, which has state power, which triggers the state action, is now being weaponized against certain people, because we do know that there are many other people who have been reported, where cases have been opened, but the NPA has not been very eager to follow those. We've seen instances where mere noise from the media has led the NPA to act drastically. We cannot forget Duduzane Zuma, who, when he came to bury his brother, was arrested immediately and shackled to the courts, only to find that the NPA does not have a case. They had to resuscitate another case, which they also lost. So this is where the NPA must be seen not to be used and should not fall into the noise. But the reason why we have a constitution, why it says you should be presumed innocent until you are proven guilty, is precisely because of these things. This was not an accident. It was anticipated, because people have already seen how the legal process itself may be flawed, how certain people can be hunted down. Take the case of Thandi Modise. Is it not a coincidence, a very exciting coincidence, that the case gets resolved within the 30 days that has been put, when the case had been dragging for a long time? Because if the case was still on, she was going to be forced to have to step aside. But for some miracle, the case collapses easily. You're not going to have other people believe that it's just a mere coincidence.
All right.
The notion of presumption of innocence is sacrosanct in most constitutions, including our constitution, including the constitution of the ANC. But that's Professor Tefo was also saying, that there is also a case of not making sure that you don't put the cart before the horse. You don't suspend the people until they have gone through a process. When you do that, you violate or offend, even to use his words, you offend the spirit of the Constitution and of our Constitution as a country, and that of the ANC itself.
All right, let's leave it there for tonight. Let me thank you all for coming onto the show, Dr. Sipho Siepe, Sanusha Naidu, and Professor Lisiba Tefo.